episode of An American Discussion. I'm your co-host, Drew, along with my co-host,
Michael.
So today we're going through an economic discussion, I believe. Michael, I think you have some material prepared for that. But before we do that, let's talk how you been, man.
Oh, I've been doing pretty good. Just working this week. Not too much going on. We had some family over last night. That's always fun. And my daughter just had her first day of kindergarten this week. So, what about you?
Nice. Yeah, I mean, a lot of the same. I mean, I didn't have any family over, but a whole lot of work. And I know Amelia went and met her teacher yesterday, so they all went and did that. They start next month, so Amelia does. So, yeah, just getting into the swing of that. They went to the school today. There's a little meltdown when they had to leave the park, but nothing too crazy, stuff to be expected from a 4-year-old. So
yeah, we had the same kind of thing at the open house before Mara started school too. Both my kids wanted to play on the playground and didn't want to go home.
Yep. It's almost impossible to get kids out of the playground.
Oh man, to be a kid again. The simple joys in life.
Right? Agreed. Not having to pay taxes. Not having to go to work every day. It's great.
Dinner just gets set in front of you.
Just set in front of you, and then you still get... And then you get to complain about it, and the same person will put a different dinner in front of you the very next night without a qualm in the world. It's crazy. Like, craziness.
They're not washing clothes or unloading the dishwasher or
Nope.
doing yard work. Man.
The only things my kids have to do is to put their plates in the sink when they're done.
Oh yeah. You gotta teach those good habits. Cleaning up toys, cleaning up messes,
Agreed.
all that good stuff.
Absolutely. Anyway, speaking of good policies, not really a great segue, but I'm going to force it, into your economic discussion. What do you got for us this week, Mike?
Speaking of segues, we're going to talk about the history of the Segway. So, did you know? No, I'm just kidding. So, today's topic is talking about some price gouging laws and price fixing laws and the history of that in the United States. And if you've been following politics at all, you'll probably recognize this topic as the prospective Harris administration's first piece of economic policy that they've proposed. So,
the first piece of policy that they've proposed, to be honest.
I mean, they've talked a lot of policy ideas, but yeah, this is I think this would really be like their first one of the first more specific things. Although we'll get into what they've said and what they haven't said. There's not really any actual policy, but it is a little bit more fleshed out than some of the other things that they've said in their campaign.
Which I will say, it's kind of wild that we haven't in over 30 days of this campaign, but that can save till the end.
Yeah, I think they've really been kind of riding the wave of just saying, like, look how bad the other guys' policies are, and you know what we stand for, basically. But now they're getting into some actual policy, which it's good to hear. Although, if it's anything like the Biden administration, we basically know what kind of policies are going to come out of a Harris administration. But
ones I'm definitely not a fan of, but
we'll go ahead and get right into what we're going to talk about today. So this came up because you messaged me the other day, and you basically said, "Hey, what do you think about this proposal?" That basically that Kamala Harris said she wants to enact some federal price gouging laws, as well as put in some kind of measure to combat some of this massive inflation we've seen, especially in grocery items, going after these corporations basically for driving up prices unrealistically. To which, and you had a little bit of your own opinion thrown in there, obviously, but my response to that was, when I heard about this, I was very confused because, as far as I was aware, there were already anti-price gouging and price fixing laws on the books, which prompted me to look into this, and I thought it would be a great issue or a historical topic to discuss here today. So, I want to start out with price gouging because that's kind of how this issue has been framed, right?
Yes, and to be fair, I think it's been framed incorrectly, like you and I were discussing.
So, I'll get into that a little bit. Maybe we'll touch on it as we're discussing this. We'll kind of see how it goes. This is kind of a two-part discussion, and yes, like you were saying, I think it's being framed incorrectly on kind of on both sides, really. People are just really misunderstanding what maybe price gouging is altogether, as well as what this economic policy would be. Anyway, we're going to talk about price gouging first. So price gouging, for anybody out there that doesn't know, is basically when some sort of retailer or provider of goods or services raises their prices in response to some kind of market influence. And basically, they're raising prices in such a way that it is taking advantage of that situation to basically an outrageous degree. So,
do you have like a more like a relatable example maybe for the people at home?
Yes.
Kind of break that down a little bit more digestible.
So I've got a definition here. It might make a little more sense. But price gouging. This is from Wikipedia, just to make everything clear. This is just one of the best definitions that I found for it. But price gouging is a pejorative term used to refer to the practice of increasing the prices of goods, services, or commodities to a level much higher than is considered reasonable or fair by some. Now, when we talk about price gouging laws and the history of price gouging, we'll see a pretty big theme in where these laws are applicable and how they're applied. So one thing right off the bat I'd like to say is that there is currently no federal law against price gouging. That is something that I was surprised to learn. This is all regulated on a state level currently, which gets into some issues that we'll talk about, and that's why I think this might be where she was going with this policy, but like we said, we actually don't know what the actual policy is yet. So the very first price gouging law was enacted in New York State when there was a scarcity of heating oil in 1979. So essentially, in New York, they had this shortage of heating oil, and the state was very concerned that, as these companies were driving up prices during the winter, people couldn't afford it, and it was having an undue impact on the elderly and children. And to protect the consumer, they enacted a law that basically said, or specifically said, during any abnormal market disruption of the market for consumer foods and services vital and necessary for the health, safety, and welfare of consumers, resulting from stress of weather, nature, failure or shortage of electric power or other source of energy, strike, civil disorder, war, national or local emergency, or any other cause, no merchant shall sell or offer to sell any goods or services for an amount which represents an unconscionably excessive price. So basically, it's saying, if there's some sort of outside pressure, these retailers and consumer services cannot jack up their prices to an insane degree just to take advantage of people who need those things. So then the first time it was actually enacted, that legal action was done, was after Hurricane Gloria in 1985. As you can guess, there's tons of different things that happen during a hurricane that companies, have to provide goods and services for. One thing from living in the South, you and I both know, bread and milk just flies off the shelves, right?
Mm-hmm. We saw a lot, during COVID when all that stuff flew out the window, especially toilet paper.
Yep, and I'm not going to touch on the COVID price gouging too much here. We can a little bit, but there was definitely some price gouging lawsuits that happened during COVID, and I think there could be a lot more if they had the ability to go after some of these companies that weren't providing goods and services directly to the customers. So after Hurricane Gloria, lots of trees down, and then all of the tree service companies were charging exorbitant rates. So the New York Attorney General was able to get $30,000 in refunds for people in Long Island. So that was really the first price gouging law and the first example of them using that law to go after a company for doing that. The next example. Oh, go ahead.
What year was that again? I'm sorry, I missed that.
That was the law was enacted in 1979, and Hurricane Gloria was in 1985.
Okay, so just 6 years after. That's actually not too bad.
So then the next big example was Florida. So after Hurricane Andrew in 1992, Florida also enacted a price gouging law. And then in the lead up to that, there were 3 other states that passed price gouging laws, Hawaii, Connecticut, and Mississippi. And then following Florida after Hurricane Andrew was California. There was an earthquake in California in 1994, and they then enacted a price gouging law as well. So at this point now, most of the nation's states have some sort of price gouging law. I believe, I don't have the specific reference in front of me now, but I believe it's 46 states that have some kind of price gouging law, give or take.
Do you know which 4 don't, out of curiosity?
I do not. I don't have that right here, but I know that the price gouging laws that are on the books are actually pretty widely varied in their content, but there are some similarities. So California was, I believe, the first one to put a ceiling on the price gouging metric, basically. So say you can't charge more than this % increase above your cost to the business, right? So California did 10%. And some people, when they were passing that, argued for 50%. But that was ultimately voted down by a pretty wide majority, which would have basically said, hey, if there's an earthquake or a hurricane, you're allowed to raise your prices up to 50% more than your cost. However, they ended up going with 10%, and that 10% is a fairly common number to put a metric on what price gouging can be or is and is not. So what price gouging is not is raising your prices because of pressure on the supply chain due to a natural disaster. So by that I mean, if there is a natural disaster and say it damages some highways, right?
Mm-hmm.
In like let's say the state of Florida, I-75 is totally destroyed, halfway down. So now all these truckers have to go around I-75 on these back roads, and it's taking them 50% longer to get there. Well, naturally, your cost of shipping is going to go up, right? So cost of shipping goes up. Therefore, in most cases, the price of goods is going to go up.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we're talking about this in pretty simple economic terms, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about a retailer like Walmart, they're probably not raising their prices, temporarily because of something like this, but they're just such a big company that they can just eat that, right?
Yeah, they're just going to amortize the loss.
Yeah, exactly. And they make up for it in other ways. But, your small, let's say a small family-owned store or a gas station or something like that, they are going to be directly affected by that shipping, right? So, for instance, if you're selling a loaf of bread for $2 and it costs you, an extra, 75 cents to get that on your shelves, they're not going to be penalized for raising the price of the bread to $3. But they would be penalized for raising the price of bread to $3 from $2 if they didn't have an increase in cost. Now, some states require there to be a declaration of emergency. So, if the state of Florida declares a state of emergency, that automatically allows price gouging laws to go into effect. Other states don't require an official declaration of emergency, or they give that power to, say, a local mayor or a township or something like that. Okay, so that is kind of what price gouging is. So again, there's no national legislation against that, and it's almost exclusively used in emergency situations or when there's some kind of undue outside influence on the market.
So I just want to cut in real quick. I did a quick search while you were going over some of the facts, and I got a list of the states. Granted, this is from findlaw.com, so take it with a grain of salt, perhaps. I don't know the credentials of this website. But it looks pretty extensive. They even have all the laws and everything that indicate how the law was created and such. The only ones that explicitly do not have any price gouging laws are Alaska, Arizona, Montana, Nebraska, Delaware, New Hampshire, New Mexico, North Dakota, Ohio, South Dakota, Washington, and Wyoming. Just for those that are curious.
Well, that's more states than I thought. Maybe we were looking at different sources that had maybe a different metric of what price gouging is or isn't.
Yeah, very, very possible.
I know I definitely read up on some things in Washington. So Washington does have some sort of law to that effect. Although I did also do some research that said that certain states don't have official price gouging laws, but they do have laws that basically are blanket protections.
Yeah, that's what this is saying too, but they're just saying that those states don't have explicit laws. Like on the books.
Okay, yeah, so
in that effect, you know what I mean? It doesn't cover states that have something comparable.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, you definitely uh, got a good number there. I think a law firm that does or that deals with things like price gouging probably has a pretty good handle on
Oh,
what
definitely probably
laws
better
have
than me.
good price gouging laws on the books.
They
So
even have
thank
that
you for
little
that.
they have a little squiggly thing that you put before laws as well, so it looks official.
Oh, okay. Um, so we talked about COVID a little bit, right? So things like the COVID-19 pandemic and the supply chain issues, the global supply chain issues that have happened, those can also cause price gouging laws to be enacted. Um, and certain certain companies did get hit with price gouging lawsuits after COVID.
Some shipping
Um,
companies did, I saw.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that some people argue price gouging laws in states are not quite they don't have enough teeth to go after some of these companies because when they're not just dealing in one state or they're shipping from one state to another and they're inflating the cost on the shipping to an exorbitant rate higher than what it's actually costing the company,
Hmm.
that is hard to pin down. So
Especially if they're not based in the U.S.
yeah, exactly. So it depends on what state has jurisdiction and where the actual uh,
I'm pretty sure.
harm to the consumer took place, because that ultimately decides if they can or can't gather enough legal evidence to
Yeah,
go after a company with a lawsuit.
I'm fairly certain that would come down to where the damages take place. You know what I mean? So where the first suit starts is essentially who the defendant on that court case would be, and that's how the law would be prosecuted. I would presume they would have to use some sort of court discovery to get the evidence out, if I had to guess. But again, that's just speculation.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that. Like I was saying, like you have to prove that the damages occurred to somebody in your state to bring that lawsuit. So if the damages are to a company that maybe is based in a different state, but then that's affecting prices to consumers in your state, it gets
Squirrely.
very messy. Which is why some people are arguing for a federal price gouging law or anti-price gouging law. Okay, so I want to kind of shift gears away from price gouging now. That I have a better understanding of price gouging, and I hope everybody else does too.
Yeah, I didn't know it.
That was very
I didn't realize it only applied to like emergency situations for the most part. So I'm enlightened on that at least.
Yeah. I was also I knew that that's when it was gone after the most, and when people complained about it the most, like talking about gas prices right before a hurricane and that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
I thought it was just like that's when it's easiest to take advantage of, because in free market capitalism, if you're just price gouging on a normal Thursday, then you're just going to get undercut by competition, right? So it makes sense that that's when it would happen the most, but I guess I just never correlated the two.
Well, and I guess we can talk about some of the economics of these price gouging laws a little bit before we jump into the next thing. But so some people would argue that price gouging is just a natural phenomenon of the free market, right? And as you were saying, you're going to have competition that undercuts, and that's going to cause all of that demand to shift to the person with the better price, right?
Mm-hmm. That's
But
the classical
at
school
the
of
same,
economic following of it.
yeah, and that's microeconomics. When you look at it, like this business right next door to this other business, and one jacks up their prices and the other keeps them low, right? The low price business is gonna sell out of their stock basically because no one's going to the other business. Um, the other thing that opponents of the price gouging laws say is that when you have a natural disaster like that and supply goes down, right, your demand is outpacing the supply, so prices will go up, and that will also prevent things like panic buying and people, buying a ton of toilet paper and just hoarding it in their house.
But it also
now
would
that
open
that's
up a
it.
black market.
Yeah, it definitely would. And there's also laws against things like reselling certain things. I know some states have uh, laws against resale of essential items during emergencies as well, that kind of tag along with their price gouging laws. But yeah, those are kind of the two views on it. But the price gouging laws are basically there to protect the consumer from these short-term, economic upheaval events that some companies would take advantage of by jacking up the prices of these necessary goods and services.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the other topic that I wanted to talk about was price fixing laws. So laws that go after companies for basically colluding to fix prices at the expense of the consumer. So to talk about price fixing, I went on a really deep dive on this topic as well. And it's going to get us into some kind of unexpected territory for people that aren't familiar with,
The history of
economic policy of the United States and, for the last 150 years. But really the beginning of that is in 1890 with the Sherman Antitrust Act. So the Sherman Antitrust Act, as I said, 1890. So this was Senator John Sherman from Ohio, who basically wrote this bill and sponsored it. And it was passed and signed into law by President Benjamin Harrison. So basically what the Sherman Act did, this was, around the time when the United States was going on a big trust-busting spree, trying to break up all these giant monopoly companies. And one comparison that I saw was that you can basically think of a trust like a giant business conglomeration. So these mega corporations that have a ton of smaller subsidiaries that are all doing kind of similar things or the same thing, and you only have like one or two choices and they all are owned by the same two companies, right, for all these different things. That would be a trust. And that's exactly the type of thing that these laws were designed to counter. But as we'll talk about, they've really lost their teeth. And we still do have antitrust laws on the books, and they are still enforced sometimes, but only in certain ways. But to really get into it, the Sherman Act was basically made up into two sections. So the first section said that every contract, combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy in restraint of trade or commerce among the states or with foreign nations is illegal. And then the second section was any person who shall monopolize or attempt to monopolize or conspire with any other people to monopolize any part of trade or commerce will be guilty of a misdemeanor. So that's a lot of old-timey legalese words to say that forming a trust or making a monopoly of an industry is illegal. So that doesn't really get at the price fixing part of it yet, but that was followed up in 1914 by the Clayton Antitrust Act. So because the Sherman Act was very vague, and companies were, doing all sorts of things to get around it, like, renaming their trusts into something else, and, using like a loose coalition of businesses as, doing the same thing. They enacted the Clayton Act. So the Clayton Act basically got at price discrimination. So basically, if businesses are conspiring together to, price their goods and services in a way that lessens competitions or creates a monopoly, that is illegal. And then mergers and acquisitions was also part of this. So this was the same year that the United States created the FTC, so the Federal Trade Commission. So the Federal Trade Commission was created to kind of deal with these mergers and acquisitions. So basically ensuring that larger companies weren't just going to snatch up these smaller companies and just create a monopoly just out of being the only, company in the area, or whatever it is. And it also outlawed people from being on the board of directors of two different companies with the same interests, or basically the same line of business. So you can't be on the board of directors of, say, two different mega grocery store chains, or like you couldn't be the CEO of McDonald's and on the board of directors of Burger King, right? So that was the first thing that kind of got at price fixing. And then that was followed up with the Robinson-Patman Act of 1936, which further went on to restrict price fixing. And then to get into what price fixing is, so there's two types of price fixing. There's horizontal price fixing, and there is vertical price fixing. So horizontal price fixing is basically when companies collude together to say, hey, we're all going to raise or lower our prices at the exact same time. So if say Best Buy and Circuit City, to give an old reference, work together to say, hey, we're all going to raise our prices on TVs at the exact same time, or we're all going to lower our prices on game consoles at the same time, that is against the spirit of the law, because it, kind of dampens the competition, which kind of goes against all of those, economic principles that we were talking about with supply and demand. If these, two or three giant companies are all doing the same thing, and they say, hey, we're all going to work together and we're going to, keep our prices in lockstep, they're no longer serving that purpose of competition. So really all of these things are to protect the consumer in the end, but these antitrust laws, so the Sherman Act, the Clayton Act, and the Robinson-Patman Act, they were all really to preserve that, sense of competition between small businesses and try and stop those smaller businesses from dying out and being bought up by, these larger businesses. So they did a great job of, kind of preserving that competition and, making sure that there were always competitors so that those free market influences could, kind of run their course how they're supposed to. Although we are getting into some economic regulation, which you could argue definitely goes against what you would call a free market system.
Which I would.
Yeah, but really, it was all in the spirit of preserving, economic prosperity and the supply and demand principles of competing businesses, right? But in the 1970s, the Chicago School of Law, and so now this is the reference that I'm using here is Harvard Business School published a paper on the history of American antitrust laws. So we can put all of these references in the show notes if anybody wants to do a deep dive and kind of read into these as well. But they go on to say that the Chicago School of Law started teaching all of their economic students like the principles behind these antitrust laws. So these leading economic professors were espousing these ideas that rather than preserve the competition between businesses, these antitrust laws were instead meant to protect the end consumer. So they successfully argued that the original intent of even the Sherman Act in 1890 was all about protecting the consumer, and that it didn't really have anything to do with protecting businesses. That was just their method to protect the consumer at that time. So this Harvard Business School or this Harvard paper goes on to talk about how there was a ton of evidence to the contrary, saying that like the whole idea of protecting those competing businesses was the original intent. In fact, like Sherman himself talked about how that was the intent. But once that happened and the Chicago School of Law started teaching these things, it made its way up and trickled into how the judiciary started enforcing these economic policies. So this is where I was talking about it kind of losing its teeth. So it really undermined what those antitrust acts were supposed to do. So then they kind of stopped regulating those business practices that kind of stamped out smaller competition and that sort of thing. And that's really when you see the rise of these mega corporations, in the 1990s and early 2000s. So you've got Walmart, and then, all of your recognizable,
Big
heavyweights these days, Apple, yeah. Google, yep. Especially in the technology industry. And because the technology industry rose up, in the late 90s and early 2000s, that was well after all of these antitrust laws stopped being enforced in, the strictest adherence to the law.
It kind of made like a perfect storm for them.
Yeah, so now we've got these giant tech companies that nobody wants to go after for these, with these antitrust laws, although we are seeing some when it's kind of, a clear-cut case. I know Google has been gone after for antitrust laws, as well as, some of the big telecom companies. But one thing they are still doing is the FTC has continued to vet mergers and acquisitions. That was one of the big things that they were designed to do. So those mergers and acquisitions of smaller companies together or larger companies acquiring smaller companies, they do still review those on a case-by-case basis, and they do still have the authority to block that. So we've seen some pretty high-profile cases of that in recent history with telecom, airlines, and some larger tech companies. But that's kind of getting away from the price fixing aspect, but it does stay in the spirit of preserving competition. So back to price fixing, when we were talking about the vertical and horizontal price fixing, horizontal price fixing would be like, say, Wendy's, Burger King, and McDonald's all, kind of their CEOs get on the phone in a conference call and they say, hey, we're going to, everybody's going to raise the cost of their hamburgers by $1 over the next year, right? Slowly. And, one company will do it, 20 cents, and then the next company will do, 25 cents, and then so on and so forth until everybody gets up to $1 by the end of, 2025. That would be horizontal price fixing. And as far as anybody knows, like this could be happening all of the time. There's almost nothing that could stop companies from doing this and having no evidence left behind unless they, did it in Twitter. A way that left some kind of horrible paper trail.
Send an email on an unencrypted line.
Yeah, or texting back and forth, or I guess handwriting letters and have it intercepted when your courier gets bugged or something.
Notarized copy of a letter on personal stationery delivered to the FTC. Then maybe
it's on the Burger King CEO's letterhead and notarized by a notary public.
That's also employed by the McDonald's Corporation.
Yeah, addressed directly to their CEOs. But yeah, that kind of thing could be, and I would say probably is happening all the time on some level.
The problem with that, I think, of knowing that for sure, is that it would be pretty easy to make it, especially in a time like now where inflation's so rampant, it'd be pretty easy to mimic a market, right? Just how markets inflate over time.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why this is so. It's so strange to me that we're not seeing this more and more. I don't think we've seen like a major price fixing lawsuit in the last couple of decades, because it's got to be happening all the time. But it's also possible that these companies are just so good at mimicking, market trends. Like I was saying with that example where, they all collectively agree to raise their prices by X amount over X amount of time, but then they stagger it, right? They say, okay, we're going to each raise our prices a little bit so that it looks like, we're just kind of going back and forth.
One thing I also want to say is that suppliers have also been not quite monopolized, but they've merged together in a lot of cases, right? So a lot of these restaurants have the same exact suppliers. Gordon Food Service is a perfect example.
Yes, that is true, and there's really the only thing stopping a company like that from basically raising prices at their whim, basically setting their own, profit margin to what they think is, you know, comfortable for their business at the expense of everybody else is these antitrust laws.
I don't think that's
But
entirely fair.
it's a very well, it's a very specific definition of what constitutes a trust or a
Yeah.
monopoly, right? And as we talked about, it's not even really enforced with the trust aspect of it these days that much. There have also been some. I didn't get into it with my research, but there have also been some other acts that kind of scaled back that trust busting mentality a little bit. But when you talk about somebody having a single supplier for like goods and services, and then that being spread out to every business, there's only so much profit margin businesses can slash, right? So like restaurants, as you were saying, is a perfect example. So if that food service company that supplies every restaurant says, hey, this ground beef is now $5 a pound, like restaurants, they can only sell it for either at cost or a loss for so long. So basically, your prices at every restaurant is going to go up if they raise the prices from their supplier, right? And we saw that during COVID and with the supply
One
chain
thing I
issues.
want to put in here that I don't think a lot of, at least Americans that I've spoken to about, really understand is how things are priced in general. Most products, if not all, I just say most because I don't like all-encompassing statements. But yeah,
Dealing in
absolutes
absolutes.
is always bad. But for the most part, there's a markup on everything, right? Anytime it changes hands, there's a markup. So in a case like this, I just had this conversation earlier this week as well. Say a pencil, if the prices go up on each individual component of the pencil by 20%, and then after that, that's when you tack the markup. Now you're getting an increased percentage on that markup as well, which could reflect as high as a 50 to 60% total price increase, even though the prices of the components only increased by 20%.
Yeah, that's true. And then you have to factor in things like
Correct.
shipping as well. So
That's one reason why I think
these
a lot of these conversations can get conflated, because people are looking at everything at a very two-dimensional level when this is a four-dimensional problem.
Yeah, that's true. So we've been talking a lot about supply chain issues and the COVID pandemic and how that has put stress on the market. So kind of getting back to that policy that the Harris campaign was talking about. One study that I saw from I believe it was March of this year was talking about grocery store prices from the second half of 2023. And this Economic Research Center, which is stated to be a left-leaning research center, just to be upfront about that. It is the Groundwork Collaborative is the one that ran the study. Basically, they said that 50% of the price increase of grocery items could be contributed to corporate profits. So essentially, the 20% increase in grocery prices, essentially 50% of that, so 10% of the inflation of those grocery products has gone to basically directly to profit, right? So that's on top of what they were making before. So again, that's just one study that I found that I can directly cite, but it's not the only study that has looked at the price of groceries and things like utility prices and all that, and found that this supply chain disruption was not the sole factor in why prices have gone up so much. And as you know, I have quite a negative view of big business. I think corporate greed is very real and affects almost everything. I think that's definitely the case here, where we're seeing these record corporate profits at the expense of the consumer, basically disguised as there's nothing we could do about it. Look at all of these outside influences. We just had to raise our prices.
So
look at the shipping costs and all of that, but that may have only constituted a 20 cent increase in the product, and they raised the price by
so
80
one thing I'll
cents or
interject
something
there.
like
It
that.
seems like we're getting a little outside of the educational and moving more towards our conversational here, but I think that's a pretty easy argument to make, again, on a compound issue, right? So I think the argument that, one, I agree with you that corporations are greedy. I think capitalism incentivizes greed and wealth accumulation. Unfortunately, it's one of the downsides of capitalism. I don't think there's a better system out there currently, but I do at least acknowledge that is a con of capitalism. One thing I'm not sure of, everyone keeps saying these historic profits. Are we talking in dollars or are we talking in percents?
Well, really, it would be both, right?
No, because I think it's important to differentiate, because if you're saying, wow, these people last year they only made $70 million and this year they made $100 million, that's crazy.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying.
But really,
no,
it's
like
Go ahead.
margin, like percentage wise, like your return year after year, right? So that's what I've talked to you about this before. I don't know if it's been on a podcast that actually went out, but when you talk about like your fiduciary responsibility as a business to your stakeholders, right? Your shareholders.
Those are two different economic terms. So I just want to be clear.
It doesn't constitute the fact that you owe a higher percentage return on their investment every single year, but that is what these boards basically demand. So if you want to be a successful CEO of one of these giant Fortune 500 companies, you have to show better return quarter after quarter, right? So that's what we're talking about. Like, if you're showing a better return quarter after quarter, that's just by definition historic profits.
And that's my point. Is saying
every year,
I think
right?
Saying there have historic profits, especially during an inflationary cycle where literally everything is getting more expensive. Thus, the profit goes up because the value of the money has been debased. I think it's a little hyperbolic, right? I think this issue is being blown way out of. I think it's really easy to blame corporate greed, and a lot harder to blame the team that you believe you represent, whichever it may be. And that's why I don't like the historic profits, right? Like, yeah, no shit. If you devalue the money, that means there's going to be more dollars for the same value good. I mean, it's literally what debasement is. Then obviously you're going to make more money when you sell something further in the future, even if we only use the 2.5 federal inflation rate that is the goal, right? So any positive inflation causes for higher profits just because it debases the currency, so it makes that number after the dollar sign higher. You know what I mean?
I do see what you're saying, but what I'm talking about is these studies that are saying adjusted for all of these things, these companies are still they're raising prices to a point where they're in fact raising their profit margins by 50%.
50% of what it is, or 50%
So
of the cost of the good?
50% of what their previous profit margin
Okay.
was, they have raised the price such that they have doubled their profit margin, right? Or a 50%
Another question
increase,
I would
right?
have on that, just
So
off the bat, and just for clarity, for those, because I don't think our introductions, I don't think that podcast is going to make it. I don't think we can export it off that platform, unfortunately. But I am libertarian, so I am almost 100% against government regulation. Not quite 100%, but I think there are some, for public utilities especially, I think there's a place for them. But for the most part, I'm against government regulation. That being said, I don't think. I don't think that one, uh, price fixing is good. I think it's led pretty poorly in most historical contexts. But I also think that it's something that, one, I would have to see exactly what studies you're talking about in order to agree or disagree on that particular study. But I would also have to see the numbers, right, which aren't even released to the public for the most part from these big companies. So a 50% increase from 15% profit, which was 7.5 out of 15, so you'd be looking at 22.5% at that point. That is a big jump, but if the profit margin is 40%, that's a much bigger jump, right? So I think it's kind of hard to talk at my point here is it's kind of hard to talk at scale without at least having the numbers. But maybe that's just me complaining that I don't know what I'm talking about.
no, and I mean that's fair. So saying that the free market will work itself out, that's definitely an economic philosophy, right, that a lot of people hold. Me personally, I don't think that is what's good for consumers in this day and age where we are talking about the global economy. Your principles of supply and demand on a microeconomic scale do not extend to these global macroeconomics in the way that you would expect for the most part, right? Like when we're talking about something like the iPhone, like the rise of the iPhone, that does, have that same kind of supply and demand curve that you would expect, globally, right? And that's how these companies are able to, make a loss on or take a loss on, a product like that for a while, and then, or the Tesla, right? They did the same thing. As demand goes up, you can scale back your supply, and then price goes up, and eventually they make a profit, right? But
Tesla's model
when
is
you're
a little
talking
bit
about
different.
things
I
like,
don't think that's great for the economic conversation, seeing as they make most of their money off tax credits. But I see what you're saying.
yeah, that's true. I mean, they are profitable on, or I guess have been profitable on some of their models, from what I've seen. Although I think some of their models definitely still
Yeah.
take a loss or never made a profit. But yeah, you're definitely right there. They have the whole Jeff Bezos economic or company setup is that's a whole nother can of worms. But yeah. Well, but back to the discussion of kind of the global economy, right? When you're talking about food and shipping and suppliers in other countries working for labor costs that are
Abhorrent.
a fraction of the cost of what it is when in the end consumer country, you're not exerting as much pressure on that economic system by even one country, at least if it's a smaller country, even one country having some sort of economic pressure like lower demand for a product, right? They can just divert that and spread it out everywhere, and
So
then you don't have to you market that for a discount in that country or something like that, but you're not realistically affecting your the production or the shipping cost or anything like that as
So
much as
I've
you
got
would
a question
expect.
for you. You're talking about this global economy and how we have to regulate um, different merchants uh, from different nations. Um,
No, no, no. I'm not saying that we have to regulate internationally. I'm just saying that the global economy is so much more complex that I think American free market capitalism
First off, we
is
do not
not.
have that now. I want to be very clear, both on my belief and with the rest of the audience. The United States is not under a free market capitalism model right now.
I actually don't think there is a single country that is a
I agree.
complete free
I
market.
agree.
But
I just
yes,
want to be very clear.
I do take your point.
A lot of people think that the
Uh,
United States is this bastion of
my
capitalism, and I would argue that you have, first off, you have corporate cronyism, which we see with the 2008 bailouts of all the banks, even the one with the bank that just shut down last year in California, or you see with the automakers for the bailout when they crashed. We are not a free market capitalist society. We have not been, I don't believe, since really our founding. But I guess if you want to look at a more recent note, ever since we came off the gold standard, the idea that we are a free market capitalist society is just not true.
No, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about regulating the economy with things like the Interstate Commerce Act in
Mm-hmm.
the 1880s, right? So like, it's been a long time, and I would certainly hazard to guess that even before that, early 1800s, there was probably some kind of economic
Yeah,
regulation.
once there's regulation, free market capitalism is now done. Just for the audience to know,
Yes,
that phrase is romanticized a lot in current public discussion. Um, and it's just not real. Everyone wants to blame big bad capitalism, but that's really not what we have right now.
I mean, we are a capitalist economy, right?
Yes, but
And
not in the
now,
traditional
when we talk
sense.
about the free market, as you talked about, it's not free market
Yeah.
capitalism, right? But I do think that a regulated capitalism is what we need, and it is what we have. I just think we need to tighten up, some of these things. Again, I'm not claiming to be an expert on economics by any means. This is just, my
Mm-hmm.
personal opinion as just some guy that leans fairly liberal, both socially and economically.
Where I tend to lean liberally, socially, but not economically. Just for transparency of bias.
Absolutely. But either way, I did want to talk about this Harris administration or prospective administration policy. Now, kind of the gist of what it was Kamala Harris put out that she has promised that she's going to enact the first federal price gouging law, and she is going to hit back at big corporations for price gouging, especially on groceries, right? Hit that those high grocery prices, and kind of citing some of the same things where it's not just inflation, it's corporate greed, like all of these things that I was just talking about there. Now,
Do you have like a
I'll
Do you have
tell
like
you
an
my
average
opinion.
percentage on what this price gouging is that they're claiming? I haven't found one. Um, which I think is honestly, maybe this is a little conspiratorial of me. I think that's part of the quote unquote policy that the Harris administration has out right now, is they don't want to give specific information because specific information can be rebutted, which is why they're not. And that's just my opinion. I guess we'll see after.
Yeah, I think the
To be completely transparent,
Wait, we can talk about campaign strategy, but I honestly think that the Harris administration, or the Harris
No, you're
campaign's
right. She is part of the administration
campaign
right now. I
strategy,
mean, regardless of opinion.
she's, well, yeah, she's part of the Biden administration, prospective Harris administration, you know, Harris campaign. I think their strategy right now is more sit back and just like watch, you know, the damage that the the Republican Party can do to itself. And all we have to do is just point out their
So
bad
I don't think
policies,
that's the
and
case. I
that's
think
kind of
I
it.
see what you're saying. I think this has been the Democrats' argued style, right? Whether it is or not, since Obama. I don't think that's the case. I think the facts of the matter is that September 10th, I believe, is the next presidential debate. Um, Kamala Harris already said that she will get an interview scheduled by the end of the month. Not that it will be this month. I think that the last presidential debate with Biden was so catastrophic for the Democratic Party that they don't want to risk any. They don't want to expose any chinks in their armor until after that debate, right? Because they don't want to give any opportunity for that. Now, that could be conspiratorial.
Yeah, that and that.
I think if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And that's what it looks like, and that's what it sounds like, because we haven't seen policy in over 30 days from a presidential nominee in an incumbent administration, which is just weird to me. But again, that's political strategy, not economics, as we're discussing now.
I mean, it could be strange. I mean, like the Republican Party didn't even run on a platform in the last election, so like they did not propose any policy almost at all before the 2020 election. That's just kind of for comparison, but I do think that you could be right there, that they just want to save all of their momentum until after the debate. Because at the moment, and I'll say this up front, I don't trust polls whatsoever.
I trust them with about 40% accuracy.
I think that polls, especially this far out, are basically worthless. But the Democrats are kind of riding a wave of all of these good polling numbers that keep being reported, and they have a lot of youth engagement right now.
Trump just went on Theo Von, which is crazy.
So
I'm proud of Theo. He asked some smart questions. I'm not gonna lie, way smarter than I anticipated. I recommend the watch, to be honest.
Yeah,
I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but he directly asked Trump about the opioid epidemic and why the Sackler family pretty much got away unscathed. Which I didn't expect to hear from him. I thought it was actually pretty good of Theo. What you think of Trump is regardless, but I think if you're a Theo fan, it was definitely a good watch to see that side of him. But back to what we were talking about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm not familiar with him, but I'll have to check it out. Okay, so back to that policy. So to answer your earlier question, the like increase in grocery prices that I've seen quoted pretty consistently is like about a 20% increase in grocery prices over the last 3 years. So basically, since we started seeing rising prices during the COVID pandemic to now.
So I do,
or maybe just on the tail end of the COVID pandemic,
20%,
but
right?
Yeah, somewhere. So I think I've seen numbers quoted, between like 20 and 23%, but generally around 20.
Is that the inflationary numbers are showing year over year for the past 3 years comes out to. It's 4.1, 8.0, and 4.7. So that comes out to 12.1, 16.8. So pretty close to your 20% there. So I just want to point that out, that we are seeing that. And that's year over year, so those numbers can be added. It's not an average, right? It's more inflationary than the previous year. So I just want to make that perfectly clear too.
I'm gonna have to. I don't have the quick brain for math right this second, but I'm pretty sure that's not how that works with the additive percentages for inflation. But I would have to double check, as I said. So, but yeah, again, like this increase in food prices and these price gouging things. What I've been seeing is a lot of people, really going after Harris for this proposed price gouging law, or these, going after the grocery stores, saying that it's, just, the it's going to be the government setting prices and all of that. So, I think what it actually is, everyone's best guess really is that it would be something similar to what Senator Warren proposed a couple of years ago.
That Biden supported.
Where,
yeah.
Yeah, Biden and Harris both supported
this. I think
just
reaffirmed earlier this week that she supported, right? I just want to make sure we're talking about the same one, because that's the only one I've looked into. I didn't look into any other previous ones. Okay.
I believe so. So this is, and specifically this is for the, combating grocery store price increases, right? So what that bill was supposed to do was, during times of economic upheaval or outside influences, right, like we were talking about, so disasters or supply chain issues or any kind of thing that would upset the market, right, it would prevent stores from basically raising their prices to unconscionable levels. And I apologize, I don't have the specific verbiage with me right here. But what I will say is, when I read it, it was very similar to that, that original price gouging law that we talked about from New York, where it was very vague. And then the Senator Warren's bill said that it would be up to the FTC to develop a plan for how to, enact that policy. So, if they wanted to set specific metrics for what constituted that, it would be up to the FTC, right? But that was not specified. So I have a negative opinion of this bill.
Interesting.
So I do not like that it's very vague and that it's just left up to the FTC. You can like, I could use my bleeding heart all day and say, I expect the best out of people, and I think the FTC would do its, market research and have a great team of economists, like, all get together and say what constitutes this, and, what percentage increase is, whatever is acceptable. But I don't think that a bill that doesn't define what the metric is for being penalized is a good idea.
Can you elaborate that a little bit?
And I've seen that sentiment a lot.
Can you elaborate on it?
Do you agree with that?
Sorry, I wasn't following exactly.
Okay, so essentially, Senator Warren's proposed bill was that during times of economic upheaval, right, if corporations raise their prices to an unconscionable level, the FTC would have the ability to decide if it was a, excessive price hike and then enact fines. So it was essentially that vague, like hey, the FTC is going to deal with this.
In general, if you're asking me, do I think that a federal regulation on the economy is a particularly good idea, I'm going to side typically with no. But I understand what you're saying from your position, that it's too vague and it's not specific enough. I can understand. I can appreciate that.
I just think that it opens the door for both positive and negative impacts from this, but really it's the negative impacts that I would be concerned about, because the FTC is not, legislative in nature. They can just kind of set their own metrics, and I don't want to say do whatever they want, but one of the big things that I've seen from the conservative side is that the FTC would just set prices and set what the price of milk and bread is going to be at the grocery store, which I don't buy that.
From what
but
you just said,
I
it's
do
not
think
ruled
that
out, right? The vagueness of the statute does not rule that out.
um, so it was basically that the FTC would be able to fine companies for
Yes, but a fine is
doing this.
also an incentive.
I don't.
Right? It's a negative incentive, but it's an incentive to do what the government wants you to do, which is a big problem I have with regulation.
So it wouldn't be. I don't think there's any interpretation of this bill that would allow the FTC to set prices, but it could say the FTC could say, during a state of emergency, there's going to be a price freeze on everything, right? And that would be what I would consider a bad idea.
My point on just the point you're on now is that it doesn't explicitly rule that out as a possibility, which I realize is what you said. But I think the Democratic side of saying, no, they would never do that, I don't see that happening. I don't personally give a damn what you see happening in that aspect. Because if we're starting the argument on corporations are greedy and they do bad things, fine, but the government has been shown to do the even worse things regularly. And often for much worse reasons.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. Like as we've seen with some of the previous administrations and some of the proposed plans from these conservative think tanks.
If you drop Project 2025 right now,
any kind of well, we're not going to talk about that, or
phrases.
any of those kind of things for we'll save that for another episode. But I will say that the efforts to make it so that these positions in these government regulatory agencies can just be fired and replaced with whoever the current administration wants. That would be a huge issue for something like this, when you just leave a huge vague power up to whoever you want. And you could say that about both sides. Like if you say, hey, what if Harris takes the presidency and she puts the founder of Socialists for America in charge of the FTC, right? I would say you would have a similarly negative outcome to if you put one of these other.
That'll change my argument. I'm grinning right now in case I know you can't tell. But
now you're gonna make me dig.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna make me dig for a good one.
Because I'll even give you my argument right off the bat. If the argument is the comparison to the Socialists of America versus, I'm assuming you're going to say a big banker, because that's the logical choice for the sake of your side of the argument. I would argue that no, the Socialists for America doesn't have an economic stake or dog in the race, where the big banker does. So I don't think it's a fair comparison. But you did make the comparison, so I want to give you the opportunity to make that comparison first.
I was going to say the Cato Institute. If you said you took the founder of the Cato Institute, who is basically somebody, I'm sure you're familiar. They share a pretty similar economic view. If you took the founder of that group or the founder of Socialists for America, like, you're going to end up with something crazy happening, no matter what, basically. If you give them free reign and say, you can do whatever you want with this.
Cato Institute's actually a libertarian
organization. Now, again...
Yeah, so I'm pretty familiar.
So now that's not to say that I think negatively of every person. I don't think that most people, even if they had a vested interest or particular worldview, I don't think they would go against what
the executive
modern economic policy and the whatever the executive branch their economic strategy was. But it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
So,
I don't know. I tend to think that people that hold cabinet positions, it's usually just used as a favor. They don't know what the fuck they're doing in the first place, i.e. Pete Buttigieg. They just get in there for political favor. They don't actually get in there for being great at the job. And that's another issue. I think it's kind of a catch-22 with cabinet positions, right? So in order to get somebody who's an expert in the field and truly understands it, you have to get someone from the top of that private sector business, essentially. Because the people that are best in it, this is something capitalism does great, in my opinion. It's merit-based for the most part, with the exception of obvious government regulation. That excellence tends to rise to the top, right? It separates itself. So you get someone that's very knowledgeable in it, but obviously they also have a stake in it because they've had to work their entire life to get through that portion. And the ideal, I assume, for cabinet positions is to get someone that's super knowledgeable in it so that they can run that portion of the government, more or less, which we just don't see anymore. A lot of them are just, like I said, political appointments opposed to what's best for the nation. But that's my TED Talk.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think they tend to appoint people that they think are going to do a good job in an administrative capacity, regardless of what the position is, for the most part. Although you do see some people getting put into positions based on their previous experience, which is good, especially for some of the niche
economy,
things.
that is critical that you have someone that, because it's such a in-depth and compound and complex facet of our government. I don't think putting a know-nothing, for lack of a better word, a mayor of some small town in charge of the economy, I think is kind of crazy. Not that, obviously, my previous example of Buttigieg was from Gary, Indiana, and he wasn't in charge of the economy. But that type of thing, even transportation, we can go to the same thing. It's such a compound problem, and you have a guy with zero transportation experience to put him in that position.
Hey, I've driven through Gary, Indiana, and I can tell you, there is transportation.
Yeah.
Very slowly.
I'm proud of Gary. They're no longer in the top 10 most dangerous cities in America, so they've come a long way. They just got a lot of rebuilding to do.
Did they also fall below 100,000 people and fall off the list because of that,
our
hometown?
Also, I have a bone to pick with you. You said you went to a festival held by your hometown last podcast, and I didn't want to call you out, but that's not your hometown.
Oh, it's the town I was born in.
Sorry, I just had a little gripe with you that I forgot to mention earlier. You son of a bitch.
All right. Well, the only other thing I wanted to say about the Harris policy was that if the intent of what she was talking about with price gouging was for there to be a federal law against price gouging that emulates what the states have, I think that's probably a good idea. I know you'll disagree with that on principle, and that's okay. But I think that would allow some of these trickier cases where it's interstate and the it's either like a multinational or huge national company that's doing this on a large scale. It would allow them to be held accountable for that kind of thing. Like I was talking about, especially with things like transportation
let
of
me ask you
goods and
this.
services,
How do you
or
feel
people.
about the monopolization and it sounds like horizontal price fixing from nation to nation of the pharmaceutical industries that charge almost every other country fractions of what the Americans get charged for medications? How do we feel that is impacted by this? Not from this law, from this policy standpoint as far as the Harris administration, but on scale, do we think that's a net positive or a net negative? For Americans, obviously, I care about other countries as far as they are people and their lives have inherent value, and all that. To be completely frank, I care more about American lives at this point than I do on large scale of other nations. Just because I have the most vested stake in this nation.
So, okay, I hear you loud and clear. You want to eradicate all the other nations.
Sorry, I've been playing a lot of Civilization 6, man. It's just
no, I have
under my dreams.
So I have looked into this a fair amount in the past. I'm probably a little rusty on it, but what I can tell you is that companies want to make money, right? So they won't charge a country that's not going to pay it this insane amount for a prescription drug, right? But in America, we have a system of privatized healthcare that encourages charging artificially high prices for medical goods and services, including pharmaceuticals, in order for insurance to pay out a realistic amount, right? So basically the way that it works is your insurance company will say, the hospital or the pharmaceutical company will say, hey, we are charging you this much for this service. And the insurance company that you have says, okay, we'll take that X amount and we're gonna pay you half of it. And then we're not passing the other half on to the customer. We're just gonna make them pay 10% or something like that, right? So whatever the amount that the hospital asks for, the pharmaceutical company asks for, that amount is not what gets paid to them in the end, and it's not what you pay in the end if you have insurance, right? But then this is where you get into problems where people without insurance or that are undercovered end up with a $1,200 prescription medication. And the pharmaceutical companies can't just say, okay, well, we're going to charge $50 if you don't have insurance, but $1,200 if you do have insurance, right? So it's another complex problem, but it really goes back to the way that medical insurance and the medical industry
I was using
interact.
it as a backdoor to knock on, as I'm sure you're well aware, publicly funded healthcare across the board. To be honest, I think it's pretty.
See what it just to get ahead of you a little bit. I think that if we tried to enact public health care with the way that our medical system has evolved now, it's going to be insanely expensive.
I think it would lead to catastrophic failure of the medical system as a whole as we know it. Unfortunately, I think that the United States of America pays the most for medications across the board than any other nation. That being said, we also provide the vast majority of medical R&D in the world. I don't think that's coincidental. And I think that, as we all agree, um, corporations are greedy. They're going to get their money from somewhere. And if, for example, the EU has laws on how much that they can sell each medicine for, they're going to reap the profits off the backs of places that don't have those laws. Now, I don't think that those laws should be passed on principle, as we've already discussed. But I also don't think it's fair that Americans are now paying more and more and more, while other countries are paying less and less and less. Basically, it's the NATO military spending issue, just for the medical sector, right?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. My rebuttal to that is corporate greed.
Okay, so if the rebuttal is corporate greed, then it's all corporate greed. That's why they need to make all that money. It's not the R&D. R&D is no component, even though it's the most expensive portion of the pharmaceutical companies, at least per their reporting.
No, the pharmaceutical companies
ones that
do
literally
do
discover
a
the
lot of
drugs.
research and development, and one thing that has pushed that is that the United States has not invested as much in medical research and development as it used to, as well as the fact that medical research and development has just like gotten exponentially more expensive as you
And these
need new
greedy fucking
technologies
scientists,
and
man.
state of the art labs and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, scientists are for some reason real expensive to pay. I don't understand why, but
Yeah, dude,
I have
I'll
a set
take
of test
half of
tubes.
what they're
Pay me
making.
something.
Half.
But
I'll put it out right now. All you pharma companies.
no, honestly, the people
No, they're
doing the
not. They're
interesting
fighting
stuff
over
are not
fifty
getting
thousand
paid
dollar
well.
grants.
Uh, yeah, research assistants are probably making somewhere in the 30 to 50,000 salary range, which is not what I would call
Yeah.
an exorbitant salary. I would say that's not even a livable salary
Well, yeah, I'm sure that's
in a lot
adjusted
of places
for
for a single person.
location as well.
Yeah, yes, it is, but yeah. Anyway, that is also to say, pharmaceutical companies do have one of the biggest profit margins traditionally. But again, I have not done an adequate amount of research on this topic in probably 6 years. So I will. I'll have to do some homework on that if you want to have a kind of a medical discussion on the show.
Another question I have in regards to this economic policy. I haven't found the exact sourcing for it. I've heard it a lot in the last couple of days, though. 25% unrealized capital gains tax. How do we feel about that? Again, I can't attribute it to the campaign because I haven't been able to find the documentation where they explicitly said it. Again, I argue that's because they haven't explicitly said fucking anything. But that's neither here nor there. Just as the on the topic of let me rephrase the question. How do you feel about taxing unrealized gains? Mm-hmm.
When you say unrealized gains, okay? I guess I was misunderstanding your question. Are you saying that the United States is not getting all of the capital gains tax that it should be,
or that now is should they enact a an unrealized capital gains tax? And by unrealized capital gains, for just an example, say you buy a stock at 50 cents, it rises up to $1.50, you should be taxed at $1.50, even if you don't sell it until it hits $1.75, or even if you sell it at $1.30. You should be taxed as it grows, regardless.
I see. So I guess the idea there is that the way that people like multimillionaires shield their wealth a lot of the time is that they keep their money in the stock market. So in these massive hedge funds or things like that, and then they say, look at my portfolio,
And they
it's worth
levy that to use that.
$18 million.
Hmm.
Please give me a loan. And then they're living off dividends, so they can just pay whatever they need to on a monthly basis, or they can cash out a small portion and pay back. But essentially, the tax shield there is that they never actually cash out their
Hmm.
stocks, or they don't cash out the majority of them, right? But they're still getting all the benefits of having that much
Yep.
money in certain aspects, right? So I definitely think that um, there should be some kind of way to tax people with
What's your
like that
line
much
for that much
money
money?
as like
Because there has to be a line,
in well,
right?
I guess again, I'm not an
The reason I'm
expert in
pushing this,
economics, right? So I am not gonna I'm not gonna propose specific policy. Anybody out there who's in the government, please do not listen to what I'm
the only
saying
reason I'm pushing
to
this right
make
now is
laws.
because
Um,
I've been a common trend that I've been hearing from you is corporate greed, and that's fine. But when it comes to making policy, there has to be a line, right? So
yeah, no, and I totally agree, and I was that's exactly what I was advocating for with that you know anti grocery prices FTC regulating bill. You need some kind of a line, right? Some kind of a hard metric. And with that, I'll just say I'm not educated enough. I don't have millions of dollars in the stock market that I borrow against. So like, I don't know what kind of returns they're seeing and what kind of money they're getting uh, to live off of that. Although like you do pay
yes,
taxes on dividends,
and that's
right?
another
So
concern that I have with
but
unrealized gains.
like there's also ways to like reinvest that, right? Like if you automatically just reinvest dividends, I think there's also some tax implications for that.
I think another
But
important thing to say is that investing in stocks, especially things like penny stocks, are beneficial for the country. It literally pays for innovation. Um, so I think that is important. Now, my personal stance is I think it's gross that you can become a multi-billionaire by just moving money around, by not actually producing fucking anything.
yeah, you're not you're not
I
contributing
disagree that
anything
you're
to
not contributing
society as a
anything because
stockbroker.
you're giving capital to, especially in the startup business, you're giving capital to fuel innovation. So to say they're not giving anything, I think is also false. Now, if you're saying the reward is,
Well, if you started by investing, like $20 in the stock market and you become a multimillionaire, yes, I agree. You have
well,
provided
even if
capital
you're
to
putting
some
$200
businesses,
million
but like
dollars in stock
if
into a
it's
company, they now have $200 million in which they can use for R&D. They can use to pay for more employees. They can use to buy source better materials, even more ethical materials in some cases. Obviously, that's not common given the capitalist model, but um, there's definitely good that comes out of the stock market, and I think just to spit on that is kind of foolish. You know what I mean?
I take your point, but I also don't think that you know like becoming a billionaire or something like that by just
Yeah, it
like you
definitely feels
said, kind of
gross.
moving money
100%.
around.
I'm on board with you there.
Uh,
Um, but I
like it's not like you worked hard to achieve the American dream by showing your merit
well,
and working your way up to
so how do
billionaire
you?
status, like
Yeah. So
like we've talked
how do you
about on the
weigh
show.
that opinion with? I know you have a maybe disdain's a strong word, but you have a disliking for Elon. How do you square that circle when he did build up from essentially Um, not, I mean, when you compare it to his multi-billion-dollar valuation now, it was essentially nothing that he started with.
I mean, he's
And
definitely made
he's
some good
also
business decisions. I will say that, like, he has built businesses
he's
from
pioneered. I would argue
basically
he's
the ground
pioneered
up, right?
entire
And I mean,
markets, um, and innovated entire technological markets
yeah, absolutely.
with Tesla and SpaceX.
Like you can't necessarily say that Amazon was the very first of its kind, but it is 100% the
Correct.
innovator and the
Um,
most
and this is the
widespread,
problem I have
right?
a lot of people ever since Elon shifted over to the right. Now everybody hates him for I don't know because he bought Twitter. I don't know.
Don't worry. I didn't
Yeah.
like him
No, I
before
just thought it was
that.
a very weird phenomenon that everyone, like, I'm sure you remember, everyone adored Elon back in the day, right? He was the Democrats' saving grace. He was their golden boy, and then he started to shift away from it, and he bought Twitter and supported Donald Trump, and now they just hate him, right? It was just very weird to me. Um, but that obviously has nothing to do with his business acumen. Do we think that we should take his money, even though he did build everything from the ground up, revolutionized the EV industry, revolutionized space travel as we know it? Do we think that we should still say, that's still too much money, you don't deserve any of that shit, and take it from him?
No. I am absolutely not saying that we should be, you know, uh, taking and redistributing wealth from, people that have it just sitting in their bank account, right? It has to be some kind of a
So,
tax on,
but see, that pushes me on my next question. If it's just
uh,
sitting in a bank, it's not stirring the economy like it does in the stock market, which is where the entire nation benefits off the stock markets via 401k investments, pensions investments, things of that nature, that literally build the rest of the country's wealth as well by their investment into the market.
see, now that's an interesting question. How does Elon Musk and all of the companies that his money is tied up in have that money? Like, how do they
What do you
both
mean?
claim to have that much money?
No, that's why I said, what do
Do
you
you,
mean?
do you understand what I'm saying? Like if Elon Musk has,
Sorry, that
yeah,
was a
that's a
little
good point.
brash.
If Elon Musk has,
Mm-hmm.
$500 million
Mm-hmm.
in stock, right? And he says, I
Mm-hmm.
have $500 million, but also all of his stock is in, say,
Mm-hmm.
SpaceX and Tesla and Amazon. Those companies also
But
say we
that's not
have
what they do. So his
$500 million.
shares are worth. We'll just use your $500 million mark. He says his shares are worth 500 million. If he has controlling interest, that means he has 51%, right? Well, actually, it would depend on however it's broken apart. But for easy math, we'll say 51% over half, so he has controlling interest. Then that would mean that 499 million um, would be the remainder, right? But even that's not owned by the company because they're a publicly traded company. That's when you get into the market cap and everything like that. So, um, I that's why I don't understand your question.
My question my question is, if we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about inflation, right? How, like, does it make sense to allow two different entities to benefit from that same massive sum of
You
money?
mean like SpaceX getting a write off and Elon Musk getting a write off?
Not so much a write-off, but this is kind of circling back around to, how billionaires use money that
Mm-hmm.
is tied up, right,
Mm-hmm.
as leverage to essentially
So,
use that money as if it was
so to
liquid,
answer what I
right?
think is your question, um, he's not leveraging Tesla's assets at that point. He is leveraging his ownership in Tesla, right? So they're not the same thing.
Right. I understand.
If Tesla has a valuation of $100 million and Elon owns half of it, then yes, the value of that stock independently is $50 million. Right, so he can leverage his $50 million piece of the pie, but that stock is still tied to Tesla, right? That money still belongs to Tesla. That's just his ownership, which would be the valuation of that stock. They're two different entities.
I agree with what you're saying. I'm just saying that like when you're talking about like Tesla. Okay, so I guess we're talking about Elon Musk and companies
and I'm
that
using him because he's the most well known,
essentially
and I know more about him than
has direct
the
ownership of, right?
billionaires whose faces I've never seen.
I just altogether I think that the way that people treat having shares of treat having shares of company as having that much money uh, is pretty. It definitely it gets around almost every regulation that we have for people making money like that. So like these billionaires a lot of the time aren't paying any
That's
kind
not
of
true.
income
There's
tax
a federal
whatsoever,
minimum
or a
tax
very
rate.
small
That's
amount
just
of
a
income
false
tax,
point that a
right?
lot of Democrats say. That's not true. There's a minimum tax rate in the United States. Now, if the argument is that that minimum tax rate is less than the average tax
So
rate of an average American citizen, fine, that's a conversation we can have. But the propagation of that lie, I think, is not beneficial. There is a minimum tax rate in the United States, so they don't not pay anything in
what I'm
taxes.
okay, what I'm saying is like these people are making like a fuck ton of money right from
Mm-hmm.
the stock market, basically investments in companies, right? But they're not necessarily getting like $1 million or like a multi-million dollar,
The
seven-figure
interest, the
salary that's being
income tax,
taxed,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
with normal income tax, right? But yes, I agree, interest and all of that, right? Like any kind of money that they make would be taxed, but there's so many loopholes of ways that people can get around that by
Mm-hmm.
like we
Charitable
said, moving
donation
money around
is a big one.
you know
Which my argument for that
yep,
is good.
charitable
I think
donation,
we need
like
to look at
having.
charitable organizations. I think a lot of them are pretty abhorrent with how little it actually gets to the end product. But I do think that incentivizing charitable donation is important in capitalism, just because greed is incentivized. So it's hoarding wealth is encouraged. Um, so I think giving a tax break for charitable donation is important, especially when you're talking about the richest people in the world that can afford to give the most amount of money. Incentivizing that is a good thing.
No, and I agree. I think philanthropy is a great thing. For
So
people
that's one
who
tax
are
break you're
who
good
are
with.
billionaires.
So
Like
I'm trying to file this down.
Bill
Great.
Gates. Bill Gates is a Bill Gates is a good example of somebody who spends a lot of the money that he has. Although if you look at his fortune, he doesn't spend anywhere near, like he doesn't even
Mm-hmm.
spend enough to make a
His
dent
practices are
in his
gross to
lifetime,
me.
right?
We can get into Bill Gates a different time, but
So
I think he is a kind of gross individual.
I think almost every major CEO has
Mm-hmm.
some awful business practices, but yeah, like you said, we can get into that later. But I think we're getting a little off topic. If you do want to have a more thorough
No,
discussion
capital gains is
on
just something
capital
that
gains
I
and
heard was a part of this policy, which is
taxation
why I
of
brought it
wealth.
up, the unrealized gains tax. And just the bottom line of my opinion on it, I think if it's something you want to do, which I don't think we should, but if it's something you want to do, I think it's just impossible to implement. Because you get into this question of, okay, if my stock goes up, I have to pay you a tax. What then happens if my stock goes down and I haven't sold it yet? Do I get a tax? Do I get the money back? What if I buy a stock really high? Say I buy a stock at its peak and then it crashes and I sell it for a loss of 10,000%. The government is now, in an act of fairness, obligated to pay me that. Or the turn side is,
I mean, that's that's how I pay taxes on my investments, right? Like I get
Only
taxed
when you
when
sell.
I make money. I do
Only if
not
you
get money
sell.
back if I lose.
Right now, unrealized gains are not taxed with the exception of at a local level on your house, right? So,
But so I
mhm.
invest in market funds, right? So like
Yes, you
I
have
am
dividends.
getting
That's a
dividends
realized.
because
Yes, that's a realized
it's
gain, though,
constantly turning,
right?
right?
So, what I'm saying is for an unrealized gain, you own that stock, it's still volatile, right? It can still go up, it can still go down, and you've not made a single dollar on it yet. The value of it has gone up, potentially, and that's what they want to tax. So when the value goes up, but before you've sold it, then you'd have to pay in. So my question is, when that stock goes down, they don't get any money back. That it's going to heavily disincentivize stock trading as a whole.
I think you would have to do it on like a fiscal year basis or something like that. And it would be maybe like on your entire portfolio, something like that, because most people are break even or up uh, from year to year, unless you are an individual
So
stock
what
trader,
happens
and then
if
you're
you
almost
are
certainly
down?
down.
Does the government then pay you back? That then
Almost certainly not. That's just
I
not how
agree, and
any
that's my
kind of
problem with
government
this
policy
whole
ever
thing.
has ever
Right,
worked.
that's my entire problem. You can take more of my money before I've made the money. Right, I haven't sold the stock, so I haven't gotten any of that money yet. And you can take that from me, and then on top of that, charge me capital gains. That's ridiculous, in my opinion. That's theft, right? Because you're not gonna. It's not a fair transition.
Yeah, I think there would have to be some sort of analysis of capital gains tax as well, because like you were saying, you can't
Oh,
get
we get
taxed
taxed
twice
multiple
on the
times on
same
the same
thing,
thing.
right? So I mean, if you get into it, yeah, you get taxed on your
You
income,
get
and then you
taxed on
get taxed to
investor
spend your
income.
income, and
Yep.
then you get taxed for the things
And
that
then you
you
get
own
taxed, especially
already,
if you get
and
into vehicles and houses. Now you're getting taxed annually on that same item, even though it's still in your possession and it hasn't changed condition at all. All these taxes. So no, the government's not afraid to tax you multiple times on the same thing.
there's there's taxes
Yep.
when you buy it and when you sell it, and taxes if you get it refinanced
Hmm.
and reappraised and you make money on it.
And now they want to raise taxes even if you don't
Absolutely.
make money.
All right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that part of the policy. My focus was just those two pieces they put out, which we were talking about the other day. But I think we had a pretty thorough
Yeah,
discussion of that,
I think we did a good job on
and
that.
our views on economic influences, and kind of the history of that sort of thing. I probably rambled
Yeah,
on
I
for
tried to start
a
cutting it
lot
around the
longer than I
48
needed
minute
to,
mark.
but we
Yeah, no,
we got
absolutely.
there
I think it was
eventually. So
a good time. Hopefully, it was informative. I know I learned some stuff, so I appreciate that.
yeah, absolutely.
I think now's a good time to wrap this up as any. So, anyone who's listening to this, we did run a little long, so I appreciate you sticking through it if you did. We'll be back next time. And Mike, it's been a pleasure. I love you, brother.
I love you too, and we'll see you guys next time.